On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Two Rights Make a Wrong edition. I'm Avi Finegold, and I'm here with Phoebe, Maltz, Bovy. We are your frozen chosen. On today's show, we talk influencers and what happens when they shift hard to the right. And we talk to Professor Till van Rahden about the recent German elections and the implications for the Jewish community. Phoebe, I loved your column this week about an influencer. What's her name again? Man Repeller?
Yes, Leandra Medine Cohen.
Leandra Medine Cohen, who you've spoken about on the show in the past. You clearly have a big no, I'm not. You don't have a fixation on her.
I do, though. No, but I would say that. So sometimes I feel like we have this show sometimes talk about like as if I'm a fan of it. There are people who I think are just fascinating figures, and I think she's one of the most fascinating figures in Jewish life today.
But there are other Jewish influencers who are making the news this week, and I wanted to spend some time to talk about that. Specifically, Lizzy Savetsky, who put up a video praising Meir Kahane. Michael Rappaport did the same, but we're not going to spend as much time talking about him, partially because I've met him and he's friends of friends, and we can leave that alone. I put up a mezuzah with him one time. That's a story for another time. Where I want to talk really is, like I said, Lizzy Savetsky and Meir Kahane, and Leah Leibovitz, who's not an influencer, but he's a journalist, also has been calling to talk about this. But let's focus on the influencers and let's focus on Meir Kahane. So tell us, first of all, who is Lizzy Savetsky and what she said and where this is going.
Lizzy Savetsky is an influencer married to the plastic surgeon who offered free plastic surgery to victims of October 7th, whether restorative or mood enhancing, effectively, right? Remember this guy?
I think he's come up.
But anyway, this is his wife, and she is an influencer in her own right. She pivoted from kind of lifestyle influencing accessories, so forth. In 2021, so not post-October 7th, she pivoted to pro-Israel influencing, which includes such things as posting a thirst trap for Israel of herself in a bikini made by either Israeli or Zionist or designers, but whatever. The point is, that was her pivot, and she did it earlier than most. So there has been post-October 7th, this whole question of where Jewish influencers stand with regards to the Middle East. What is an influencer? Well, it could be any number of things, and some of them are more political. But in this context, I'm talking about sort of conventionally feminine presenting women who look a certain way. Lizzy Savetsky was once almost on Real Housewives of New York. That would be this sort of certain way. I'm talking about it's a certain aesthetic. It's like about selling cosmetics, clothing, things like that. It's selling something, but the something generally isn't political. But then what happened after October 7th is if you go to the Instagrams of various influencers, including people like Leandra Medine Cohen, who used to have the Man Repeller blog and now has a Substack, immediately after October 7th, you see this kind of battle forming in the comments of their Instagram between the people who want them to speak out one way about the Middle East and the people who want them to speak another way about the Middle East. These are not people who had previously had any kind of geopolitical knowledge or interest or anything that to speak of, right? These are just people in a different realm, right? Mm-hmm. The reason this was all happening, to some extent, makes sense when you think about 2020, 2021, where influencers were putting Black Lives Matter. There was a kind of agreement that you could put that. But it got much more contentious post-October 7th. I give all of this as the backstory to where Lizzy Savetsky is coming into things, because she is not one who hedges. She is not one where people are battling in her comments about, is she going to come out as pro-Palestine or pro-Israel? It's clear where she stands, right? Mm-hmm. Except another thing that can happen, apparently, and that's what this story we're talking about today is an influencer can be so extremely on one side versus the other side that they alienate their audience, right? So you can alienate your audience by kind of not pleasing anybody, but you can also alienate your audience by going far, far, far off the... We should say what it is she did. She posted a speech, right?
Yeah. Well, let's play a clip of it.
Yeah.
And that's what the Arabs know and understand. If you're good to them, you're not good, you're weak. And if you're weak, you're dead. And if you're strong, they listen to you. I don't expect them to love me. I'm not the kind of Jew who walks around begging people to love him. I'm sick and tired of being... You know when people love us? After every Holocaust. That's when they love us. That's when they love us. That's when they give us plaques and monuments. Well, I'm tired of Kaddish, and I'm tired of Yortzites, and I'm tired of plaques. And I don't want love, I want respect.
Okay, yeah, that's a thing.
So has she alienated every single person in the world? No, because it's a big world and there are people who think any number of things. But what she has managed to do is, in the comments to her post and in the Jewish media articles written about this, basically it's a sea of people whose Zionist credentials are impeccable saying this is not okay. This is something we renounce. This is something we have said is not what we stand for. You are harming the Zionist cause by doing this. That is what I have seen.
Unless your name is Liel Leibovitz. And
who is one person and who is also...
influential. Clearly he's speaking on behalf of people that listen to him. I mean, Tablet, by publishing an article where he openly calls for this, is not ultimately endorsing, but saying that this is a valid opinion to have and that we should be able to publish.
I think we're talking about two different things, which is what is the realm of acceptable opinion in the sort of immense thing that is the Jewish community. And there you could highlight any number of publications, but we're talking more narrowly about this lady and her fan base. And I think people who were happy and feeling this sort of Jewish pride that she was promoting, which was this kind of, it didn't seem like a far right extremist thing until it did. And it also seems like her own politics may have shifted recently, because there was some interview she did where she's apologizing for having not been on board with Trump sooner and like atoning for that she was not MAGA earlier on.
Yeah. So I get the sense that her anti-Semitism, that's what people call it, and her Zionism was fairly easy to digest until it stopped being that, with, this shift towards, real, Kahanism.
This is something that I always find interesting when it comes to influencers. This type of influencer is they have a persona where they're very easy to dismiss as frivolous, right?
The nature of influencers or influencing is that it has to be easily digestible and palatable to as many people as possible.
Sure, but that's not really what I mean. What I mean is more like that Eliza Licht, who did her video where she was claiming that I was bad for the Jews because I didn't rave preemptively about her book. She's putting on face powder. She's trying to hustle to promote a face powder while doing that same video. What I'm saying is that this is a lifestyle realm. It's fashion, makeup, materialist stuff, right? That is the realm we're talking about. So it's easily looked at as, oh, well, this isn't really political. But there's been this understanding in recent years, like trad wives are now kind of understood to be, yes, they're selling something. Maybe they're selling a dress, maybe they're selling some kind of cooking product, whatever, but they're also selling a political ideology often, right? And that there is something like substantive political going on. And I think what happened here was suddenly you kind of have to figure out, is Lizzy Savetsky even to say, is she a Kahanist? Is she somebody who you could even ascribe any kind of consistent political ideology to, or is she a ditz on the internet? You know what I mean? And I think there is this kind of mystery about that with influencers that's, to me, I think kind of interesting. It's also upsetting that this has become, well, this is the question. Avi, has this become mainstream? Is this, if all these people are telling her, no, we don't do this, is she speaking for anybody other than herself and possibly one writer in Tablet.
And Michael Rappaport, another influencer, comedian,
right.
whatever. Yes, I think she is speaking for many other people. In my anecdotal, but I think somewhat representative experiences, I have met people in the recent past who have said that, Kahane, was right, and we really should be arming ourselves and we should be defending ourselves. And I'll get into Meir Kahane said in a moment, but I think that there are people that, yes, do believe this now, or at least are saying it out loud and feeling empowered to do so more than before.
So something else that I wanted to talk about was kind of the gender angle of this, because she's a mother, right? She has a few kids. And what she was interviewed as saying kind of put her over the edge and made her post this was basically like this parade, the Hamas parade of the babies' coffins, basically. Mm-hmm. It was like she just couldn't take it. And that it did seem like there was a kind of, like, it's not just incidental that this is a woman, I think, doing this, that this is arising in that realm, because I think there's something where even if that's not where you land on it politically, and it's not where I land on it politically, there's something really wrenching about it. There's also something, really wrenching about dead babies of any background, of any, and I think this has been like, mm-hmm. It's been a very upsetting, like, reading the news, especially if you're the mother of young children, I think is a different experience, which I think in a weird way might be what ends up making people more forgiving of her than maybe they should be at this point, because it seems like it's easily understood as like, oh, she just got very emotional, so she's in favor of ethnic cleansing now. You know what I mean? Like, I think...
Yeah. Let's back up a second and understand who Meir Kahane was. He was an American-born Israeli. He was a rabbi. He was a one-time member of the Knesset until he got booted out. He's also a convicted terrorist because of his violent incitement and the things that he believed in. He believed that Jews should take up arms to defend themselves, not just in Israel, but in America. And in Israel, he did definitely advocate for Jewish supremacism over the entire land, even to the extent of what we would call nowadays ethnic cleansing, right? Really saying all the Palestinians, everybody should be gone because they are ultimately always going to be a problem for the Jewish state. He always had people that looked up to him in his life. Since he died in 1990, he's always had a small faction of people that are around. That's, to me, the existence of the Jewish Defense League, the existence of his ideas still being around and still being valid. It shows that people have wanted that sort of idea in the Jewish community for a while. The Jewish Press, which is one of the major Jewish newspapers in North America, publishes his Torah writings weekly since he has passed away. So people are into him, and it's easy to see why when Jews want to go towards a more radical solution, they would point to him and say, oh, that's the guy who has been saying this, and we should, underscore this all along. The thing that people aren't saying is that, because I know that Lizzy Savetsky went and she posted a video where she was like, I'm not saying that I endorse everything that he said, but I think that he was right in some things. And she goes on and explains with the parts that she was right. I don't think that she understands that for him, this wasn't a, like, I believe in this and I believe in that and I believe in that and I believe in that. This was a unified theory of what he believed Jews were and their relationship to the land of Israel. He wanted a theocracy. He did not want a democracy. If there was a choice between having a democracy and a theocracy, he thought that clerics, rabbis should be running the country, that Orthodox law should be the law. He believed that religious courts were going to be the courts. He did not want secular institutions.
Do you have any reason to think that Lizzy Savetsky would hear that list of things and be like, oh no, I can't believe I posted this video, and not be like, here. Well,
he would be against her. He would probably assume that posing in a bikini would be like contravening Jewish law.
I think that we're looking at a different right wing than used to exist. So certainly what you see in America with Trump, but even more so with Elon Musk and the sort of demise of a kind of puritanical social conservatism. Like what I take from what you're saying is that, like, here's this liberal feminist progressive lady who would be all put out when she realizes she's endorsed something very conservative. And I'm saying in the climate we're in now, that is the aesthetic and value system of mainstream American conservatism.
Sure. And I get that.
I think she's somebody who, like most influencers and most people in kind of her world, would have kind of given whichever lip service to progressive things in a kind of generic way when that was kind of the vibe.
What I'm trying to get at is that these people, and not just
this
her,
is a conservative, politically conservative woman.
Sure. But they are into Kahane because of his anti-Arabism, and they don't realize that it's all of a bent with a specific form of Judaism, and it's Jewish supremacism, and as a result is anti, non-Jewish people. And I don't think that they would support, right? They really believe in a diversity of Judaisms and a diversity of practice within Judaism, and he did not believe that.
Okay, so can I have one
That's
way of
where
saying
I'm
maybe, okay, I have a partial, this is the extent to which I could maybe come around, which is that I think, remember the whole conversation about was Elon Musk doing a Nazi salute or not? Mm-hmm. And that there's this kind of nebulous, like, gesturing at the thing sort of unseriously, but also doing it, And I think the way I interpreted this video was a little bit like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but this is the vibe I'm feeling. This is kind of how I feel right now. It's a mood, it's going on it's kind of throwing something ridiculous out there, partly to provoke, partly out of ignorance, with a lot of, I guess the expression I keep coming back to is plausible deniability, right? Because she can say, I'm just this bikini wearing influencer who just cares about Jews. That's all I'm doing here. But also she is somebody who meets with politicians and is kind of she is an activist. You know what I mean? She's not actually like a bikini salesperson and that's it. You know what I mean? That's not really the whole thing.
Sure. And I'm just pointing out that to take your muscular Judaism, your idea that Jews should rise up and really not only defend themselves, but it's time to get these people out, and to use Meir Kahane as your poster boy for this brand of Jewish, not being just defensive, but to really go on the offensive in this way is a really, really bad look because of all of the roots behind what this specific individual believed in.
Okay, and, so we agree that it's bad, but I think that where I think we disagree.
You don't get to go and say, I just believe in the Israel piece and in the pro-Israel piece, and he is and he was for the getting rid of the Palestinians. He was all of a piece of doing so much more than that was so odious.
Right. I agree about the odious. I don't necessarily agree that if she understood it better, she would reject it. I can't speak for her, but I'm saying that I think you're reading a lot into the fact that she does not physically present herself in modest attire, that the bikinis, right?
Possibly. I don't know.
These things are complicated.
The one thing that is not complicated is Meir Kahane was a bad person, and we should not be supportive of him.
On that we are agreed.
Well, on that note, let's move on to an interview with Professor Till van Rahden of Université de Montréal right after this.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
One of the big pieces of news this past week is that there were elections in Germany. If you don't already know, Germany's coalition fell apart last November. There were elections this week, which were run by the center-right party, the Christian Democratic Union, which will make the new chancellor Friedrich Merz. The bigger news, though, was the second place finish of the Alternative für Deutschland, or the AfD party. This hard right turn echoes similar trends that we've seen in France, Italy, amongst other places, and has many people concerned, especially because of, German history with nationalist parties. With us to talk about this is Till van Rahden, professor of German and European Studies at the Université de Montréal. Dr. van Rahden, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the AfD? When was it founded? What are its actual links to Nazism in general?
The AfD was founded in 2013. At the beginning, it was a sort of slightly strange but conservative group of people who were concerned about European integration and argued for a higher degree of national sovereignty, specifically for Germany, but for other European countries as well. Over the years, it took a sort of turn to the right and has now become one of the most right-wing and also radical right-wing political parties in Europe, to the degree that some of the more established radical right-wing parties like the Rassemblement National in France hesitate to collaborate with the German AfD.
So how is the AfD perceived within Germany?
The consensus among the mainstream political parties is that there should be no collaboration whatsoever with the AfD because it represents not just a right-wing or conservative right-wing political milieu, but a milieu that includes neo-Nazis in leading positions. And therefore, this is part of the post-Nazi consensus that has defined the Federal Republic, that no respectable political party should be working with a party that inherited sort of Nazi political traditions.
I wanted to just draw out a bit on that question of inherited Nazi political traditions. So I did my own PhD in French, and I'm familiar with the sort of questions of Front National, what it means in the French context. But in the German context, given how recently this party was formed, what is the sort of genealogical connection to Nazism, if that makes sense?
I don't think it's possible to draw a sort of straight line because there are a few years between 1945 and 2013.
Right.
But there has always been a kind of subcurrent of radical right-wing politics in the post-war Germanys. Most of the time, it was hard to discern this in the context of elections. It was more like a sort of cultural, ideological subcurrent. And for most of the time, with some exceptions, there was a party called the Republicans of all names in the 1980s that sort of mobilized some of the voters who identified with this kind of politics. But for most of the time, it was sort of hidden from, let's say, federal politics, more generally speaking. And the AfD has been able to change that. And it may also have something to do with the fact that it is now 80 years since the end of the Second World War and the German defeat and the end of Nazism.
I am curious what the connections is vis-a-vis the Jewish community. I understand that they want to ban kosher slaughter, circumcision. Is this really couched, or is there overt anti-Semitism there? What's their stance vis-a-vis Israel? Should the Jews in Germany and elsewhere actually be concerned about the AfD?
Or are they, maybe, is also...
Well, I think that there is no single Jewish voice in Germany, as there is no single Jewish voice in Canada, for obvious reasons, right? The AfD prides itself of having a significant group of members that are Jewish. They claim that they have more than 1,000 Jewish members, but there's no evidence for this. What we do know is that there are very small groups among Jewish students, particularly, but also among the Jewish community at large, who sympathize with certain elements of right-wing politics, which in and of itself is also not unusual. But the mainstream organizations, whether it's the Central Council for Jews in Germany or more sort of left liberal progressive organizations, have very little time for or are not working with the AfD, certainly, and are very concerned. So the head of the Central Council just published an op-ed saying how concerned he was about the electoral successes of the AfD at last Sunday's election.
So what specifically is concerning from within Germany? Because I think in some ways I am not a typical North American in that I have a husband who's from Belgium. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances who are from Europe, just like because of my husband being an academic. And I've known a lot of Germans, and I have heard Germans who I don't think of as political extremists say things like, it's enough already with the guilt about the war. Mm-hmm. And they're not saying this to be rude to me as a Jew. They're just saying, like, I was born in the 1980s or 90s or whatever. And this is, yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, clearly this is a party that is perceived of as extremist in Germany, but I can't tell if, like, what about it is considered extremist there, as versus coming from North America, where you say, oh, well, it's right wing, it's in Germany, clearly it's bad.
Well, I mean, the starting point of such a conversation would be to underline that the current American government is vocally supporting the AfD and calling for Germans to vote for the AfD and calling for the kind of center-right conservative party to enter into a coalition of the AfD. And that's obviously very complicated and makes...
Yeah, I was going to say that you've jumped ahead to some of our other questions, but yes, absolutely.
But that is, I think, a game changer in sort of conversations in Germany, but also across Europe. Now, if one takes the long view, what's striking about the rise of the radical right all across Europe over the past 20, 25 years is that, unlike in the 1920s and 1930s, anti-Semitism is not a central element of their ideology. In fact, they claim to be pro-Israel, they claim to be philo-Semitic, etc. That is all very complicated. And I think if you start scratching the surface of some of the philo-Semitism that, and also pro-Israel voices that come out of the European radical right, including Germany, you will find that sort of established anti-Semitic stereotypes, in fact, are driving in very strange ways the philo-Semitism.
Well, it's not, I don't think that's strange at all. I mean, philo-Semitism, that's another whole question. But can we talk actually a little bit about this US angle? So what is up with that? Why is JD Vance or Elon Musk, why are they jumping in this way?
My hunch is not that they have a sort of subtle understanding of German politics and how the electoral dynamics work, but they were playing to their base, the sort of MAGA base in the US, which in fact shares many of the ideological commitments of the AfD. And the AfD has always been looking to some of the MAGA ideologues for inspiration. And I think that, unlike the radical right, if I may go back to that in the 1920s and 1930s, because the anti-Semitism is neither upfront nor is it central to radical right-wing ideologies today in Europe, what most Jewish leaders are concerned about is the destruction of liberal democracy, the rule of law, the protection of basic civic rights. And that has an even longer story that goes back to the age of emancipation, that there's whatever else Jews believed in, and they didn't necessarily just vote for one party, what they could agree on was a certain set of principles, including the rule of law, including basic civic rights, etc. And I think that's a long history, and that's what some of the leading Jewish voices in contemporary Germany are also drawing on.
It sounds similar to what's going on in America,
yeah,
where the Jews that are against the rightward shift and the Republican Party are the ones that are worried for democracy in America, and the ones that are for it are looking to the fact that this party is very pro-Jewish and pro-Israel.
But I was just going to say, Avi, that if we talk about numbers in the US, most Jews voted for Harris, not Trump. And it sounds like something similar is happening in Germany, where whatever, lip service is being paid to, like, sort of a common enemy in radical Islam or whatever, however it's being phrased, on the whole, it sounds like Jews are not buying it.
What I'm curious is the pro-Israel stance of this party and the other radical right parties. Is it because Israel's currently under a hard right, I wouldn't say regime, but government, and as a result is anti, the people that might become immigrants that they might not want in Germany?
So in general, and that's also in some ways peculiar to Germany, there's a cross-party consensus that support of Israel is in the German national interest. Again, that's just the surface level, and it gets a lot more complicated once you enter into the details. So in some ways, the AfD is part of that idea that support of Israel is part of the German raison d'etat. Now, it's obvious that the AfD feels an affinity with certain members of Netanyahu's cabinet, and that's also the very small number of Jews in Germany who openly support the AfD, including a student organization called Beta Germany, sort of sympathize with even the sort of within the Netanyahu cabinet, the right-wing extremists. So there is a political connection, but I don't think it's sort of central to that. I think that this whole question of what is the main source of anti-Semitism in contemporary Europe is probably the most contentious issue. And then the question is it a result of a long-standing history of Christian Judeophobia, Christian anti-Semitism, so a European phenomenon, or is it something that was imported, so to speak, when a growing number of Muslim immigrants arrived in Europe, whether it's in France or in Germany or Belgium or Sweden, etc., etc. Now, that is the answer to these questions is very complicated, and these issues become very politicized in European politics, but also then in German politics.
I think the answer is kind of simple, and I go with why not both? I mean, it's
of course,
yeah.
Of course. But then the question is to what degree, and the other thing is also at what point does concern about Muslim anti-Semitism also strengthen anti-Muslim sentiments, racism, even violence? And what are the moments in which sort of Jewish communities, because of their support for the rule of law, the idea of basic civic and civil rights, becomes a factor? I mean, despite obviously very divergent views when it comes to Israel and Palestine, to work together in the European context in order to strengthen a sort of liberal democracy.
I mean, I'm just seeing a big parallel with discussions happening in the US and also to some extent in Canada about Jews and DEI and sort of diversity and all of this, where on the one hand, there is this sense among some Jews that sort of pro-diversity initiatives lean towards anti-Semitism or aren't strong enough against anti-Semitism. But then there's also this kind of zooming out that happens where I think a number of Jews also realize that if the climate is generally anti-minority, it does not go well for Jews. Maybe it's something kind of similar happening.
I would say so, but I mean, particularly in the American context, obviously, there's also something that happens in the 60s and 70s when Jews are no longer perceived as, so to speak, a minority that is vulnerable and needs protection, but are seen as people who have entered the elite of society, right? And therefore become part of the problem, so to speak, when it comes to minority rights. In the German context, I don't see much of that, and it's a different conversation. But I mean, it goes back to these big conversations. Is multiculturalism good for the Jews?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's something that also informs it, not sort of explicitly, but if you start thinking about such issues, it informs conversations in Germany and Europe as well.
The thing that you brought up before about Germany's specific relationship with Israel brings up for me a lot of ideas around the fact that Germany is also unique in history almost, in that they are the ones that actually had a formal apology to world Jews, to Israel when it was established, for perpetrating the violence, the crime, the Holocaust, all of the above. And many other countries would not have done that. And I think that Germans for a very long time felt that, and felt it in a positive and meaningful way. And we're seeing this shift away from that in America with slavery, and in Canada with indigenous, issues. I wonder, and I'm a Jew, right? I'm the one that has always told people, why would you not buy a German product? I'm sure that there are many Jews refuse to buy a Braun, a BMW, a Mercedes, anything like that. And like, why would you? Why wouldn't you? Because they have shown that remorse. But at some point, it clearly, to the younger generation, they're done with that. And I haven't figured out, I grapple with this, and I'm wonder if you've had thoughts about the nature of how long one has to be apologetic before one can say, we still are apologetic, we are still sorry about that, but we need to move on. The inability to move on makes some individuals, especially younger people, say, I'm done with this, and revert back to the other direction.
That's a huge question, and I'll try to sort of maybe highlight a few things that are interesting in my view. So the first thing is there's a discrepancy between official commemorations and private memories. And in some ways, from the get-go, the Federal Republic, at least, the story in the German Democratic Republic was different, but in the Federal Republic, the idea was that one needed to address the question of not necessarily collective guilt, but some form of collective shame when it comes to the memory of the Holocaust. Within the private setting, it was obviously often very different, and people rejected these policies because they brought up very complicated and very painful family memories, right? And I'm not just thinking about, let's say, the 200, 300, 400,000 perpetrators in a narrow sense, but also just everyday Germans who, I don't know, picked up some fancy cutlery in 1943 because they could get it on the cheap. And now it's cutlery that they have in the family, and all of these little things, but that continue to shape family memories. So that's one thing, official memory versus private memories. The second thing is that there's a huge difference. Not necessarily, it's not different, but the way it plays out makes for a different feeling, so to speak. There's the national commemoration, and then there's something that happens on the ground, so to speak, in cities, whether they are large cities like Cologne or Frankfurt, smaller cities, even small villages, who try to rebuild ties to their former Jewish communities and survivors from their former Jewish communities in the 60s, 70s, and in some ways until today. So why I'm bringing this up is because I think that there's whatever the shortcomings of this sort of commemoration of collective shame may be, it's in some ways very robust. So I'm not seeing that shift in the same way that obviously slavery now has become a badge of honor, so to speak, for the MAGA camp, right? And so that in terms of continuing to remember something that is deeply shameful is something that continues to be central for a German culture of commemoration.
Very informative. Thank you for that. Dr. van Rahden, this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, Phoebe, do you have some nachas this week?
I do. I am, after we record, going to go vote for the first time in Canada.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Unlike
elections.
Unlike in America, where you're presented with many options on a big piece of paper, you will have one mark to make, and that's it. You will just be able to ask for one decision, and that's it.
What is it about how you feel about Kahanism?
I mean, maybe depending on your writing, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. So I'm very excited about this. It doesn't feel quite real. It's like I had this kind of imposter syndrome when I got the card saying that I, could go vote. It's like, what? I'm very excited about that.
I am looking forward to my first voting in a very long time as a foreign Canadian whenever we have a federal election.
And what have you got? Borges, nachas?
It was definitely a nachas, but it was like a sort of a bit of a mixed feeling when you take your child to a concert for the first time. where they want to go to a show and you're like, well, you're not going to this show unless I accompany you because it's at a bar or it's at a large venue with a lot of alcohol and a lot of people. So I took my daughter to a concert last night, and that felt very nachasy because she's growing up, but it's also a little like, oh, I'm getting old. Yeah.
What concert was it?
We went to see Phineas, famous for his own music, but also famous for being the brother of Billie Eilish. And,
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And co-creator of a lot of the music that she does. Yeah, I went to a concert last night with my daughter. That was kind of fun.
Oh, sweet story.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending March 1st, Shabbat Parshat Truma. The show is produced by Michael Freeman, edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways we get new listeners. And as always, please do email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.